What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. In today's episode, we're going to be continuing our 5-part mini-series here on the channel titled How to Host and Start Your Own Farmer's Market. So the first episode, if you missed it, was all about finding the right location, picking a location that had good demographics in terms of population size, good traffic flow on nearby roads, and also making sure that it had the right type of zoning. So all those things considered, and we did talk about as well financing the property. You know, if you're gonna buy, lease, or borrow the land and all the pros and cons that kind of came with those different options. So that's what we talked about in episode number 1. However, episode number 2, which is today's episode, we're gonna talk all about planning. This is the planning phase. So in today's episode, you can expect to learn all about things like creating a market plan. When the times of the market, when it's going to open and close. You're going to talk about what to sell, kind of what you are going to allow vendors to sell. You're going to pick how many vendors you plan to have, the overall market size. You're going to learn how to properly file a permit for a permit application for the city. You're going to learn all about the kind of the legal side of how you structure the farmer's market in terms of from a business side of things. You're also going to learn all about who to speak to. You're going to have to speak with several other businesses to actually get things in place, such as insurance, the fire marshal, the EMS, as well as potentially places like septic and a few other entities as well. So we're going to get all into those. But in today's episode, we're in the office today, and that's actually where we're going to be for most of the good majority of this series, because most of it is actually, once you pick a good location, a lot of it is done on the computer or via paperwork. So the first thing I do want to talk about is the business side of things. How do you want to structure the market? So there's different types of business business filings. Do you want to file as a sole proprietorship? Do you want to file as an LLC, or do you want to file as a corporation? So, and there's also things like partnerships as well. Now, the two that I want to focus on, because there's lots of gray area, and I'm not going to tell you what you should file as, but by far the easiest way to file is just as a sole proprietorship. So you're going to name your market. You're going to come up with a name. Our market was called Summertime Market. And summertime, THYME, get it? So we called our market Summertime Market. Now, whatever name you come up with is going to be the kind of the business name of the market, because you're running it as a business. And if you do it as a sole proprietorship, all the money that you bring in through the vendor fees is going to come in through the market, and then is going to be passed directly to you as the sole proprietor of the business. However, it does come with increased risk. When we get to insurance and liability, there's increased risk to you if someone trips and falls, breaks their leg, a tent goes flying and hits a car. You are going to have far more risk to yourself as a sole proprietorship. Any liability is passed through the business onto you, just like any cash is passed on from the business onto you directly. So just make sure that you are aware of this. And obviously you can have an attorney or a lawyer kind of write up a better way to shield yourself from some of this liability. However, that's going to be even more cost. So just some things to consider, that a sole prop, basically you only have to file, it's a $25, small $25 fee, or maybe it's $15 even, with your city. And then basically you have to have it notarized. That's basically just the notary fee. That's your DBA, doing business as whatever business name you choose. So it's Luke doing business as Summertime Market. It's just a very simple thing. It's a formality, and it allows you to operate as a different name other than your own name. So that's just one small thing to doing business. The second way you can formulate your business is through an LLC. And this is what I would recommend. This is what Summertime Market did, so that we could actually shield ourselves from some of the potential liability. Now, an LLC, and again, I'm not a business law, I don't advise in business law, so definitely consult a professional if you have any questions. However, an LLC is going to shield you from a lot of that liability because the business is going to be the one holding all the liability. You yourself are just you're kind of the president or the founder of the business. And so if someone breaks and falls and breaks their leg, or there's a car accident or something like that, and for some reason if the blame goes back to you, the business owner, or the business owner, it's the market coordinator is not held liable. It's the market that's held liable. And so oftentimes that actually helps you to have a lot less risk on your end. And even filing for an LLC is very, very easy. You're going to file for an LLC through your state. You're going to have to file some IRS paperwork as well, but they're very, very easy to do. And basically all the money is going to then flow through the business, and it's going to be held by the business. But when you do form an LLC, there's going to be a little bit of a waiting period. There is a few more fees and filing fees and things like that. And you still need to set up like a bank account as well. So you're going to have to set up a separate bank account with the LLC. All the money is going to be, again, kept as the business. So don't let any of that confuse you. Just remember, there's a sole prop, which has very little filing, but you have increased risk. And you just have to kind of judge your risk versus reward. How often is something like that going to happen? I don't want to say it won't happen to you because obviously, I don't want you coming after me and saying, he said it would hardly ever happen. It is very, very, very rare, but that is the nature of risk reward. When it does happen, it's unfortunate. And like I said, something actually happened to us that we'll get into in later episodes. And it was very unexpected, and it was very minimal too. It was very, very minimal, but it did come down to an insurance claim that fell back on us. And had we not been protected, it could have been a personal liability that would have been unfortunate. So just keep that in mind. So sole prop and LLC. I would recommend LLC, but do your research. The next thing I want to talk about is insurance. You definitely want to get insurance for your market. Now, this is for you to be protected. I know that insurance is something that a lot of people see as an extra cost, and it will be an extra cost. When you bring in $400 to $500 per week in your market, you do have to allocate roughly $25 to $50 a week of that is going to be insurance cost. And that's, if anything happens, the insurance is going to cover your butt so that you don't have to front all of the liability. So a basic general liability policy is what you want. Now, again, I'm not a professional. Speak to a professional if you have any questions. However, we went with just a general farmers market liability policy. They actually have those things that exist, and there are lots of companies that provide them. Just go through your local broker. Go through a local broker. You will save tons of money by going locally. Because the fact they work locally, they know the area you're not working with. Don't go with like a big, you might end up going with a big national insurance firm. However, go through your local broker and they're going to find you the best rate. It's not going to cost you anymore. In fact, it's usually going to save you about 25 to 40% from what it would normally cost, because they're going to do the best work to save you the most amount of money and get them some business as well. So go through a local broker and get a general liability policy for the farmers market. That's going to cover any tripping and falling, any damaged cars, stolen property, things like that. So again, you can talk with them, but that's the policy that we got, and I would highly recommend it. The third thing that you want to do when you're setting up your market is create a market plan. Now, this is also extremely important. This is after you kind of get the ball rolling with your insurance and all your bigger picture stuff for the market. You want to create a market plan. Now, our market plan was basically how many vendors ideally at max capacity we could host. That was up to 35 vendors. We figured that out based on a 10-foot by 10-foot booth space. Now, you can go as small as an 8-foot by 8-foot booth space. Just remember that most vendors are going to have a 10 by 10 tent, and it's very common to have a 10 by 10 booth space. if you shrink that down and you keep going smaller and smaller, it will have an overall negative kind of impact on your market, because there's only so many vendors that are going to have 8x8 tents. And then if they have a 10x10 tent, the whole way that you structure your market and your overall market plan will be thrown off by 2 feet every single vendor if you don't account for that. So I typically say account for a 10x10 market vendor space, and that's going to dictate how many vendors you can have at your market. Then you want to look at, once you look at how many vendors you can have, you want to look at the type of vendors. You want to have a good mix of vendors. Do not go, just because it's a farmer's market, do not go with just solely farmers. Now, I know that sounds crazy as a farmer's market, but you do want a good mix. If you have farmers, bakers, people that sew, people that have honeybees or do maple, they tap maple trees to make maple syrup, things like that, you want to have a good product mix. However, you also want to make sure that you do set limits on the types of products being sold. You don't want it to just be like a flea market where people bring anything they want, because it's going to reduce the overall impact and it's going to look very scattered. Now, if that's what you want and you don't mind, that's fine. But for me, I was very specific on the type of vendors that we wanted to have. And so we had people that did wood crafts. Basically, it was a farmer's market and handcrafters market. Everything that we had was done by hand. And I loved that. There was people that even brought soaps, and that was awesome. So there was a lot of really good product mix, and that diversity kept people coming back. There was always something new, and there was always something that someone needed. And so knowing the types of products that we wanted to sell at the market really helped us kind of reach out to those prospective vendors. Once you've done that, the next thing that you want to do in terms of a market plan is create rules. This is so important. So this is going to be obviously the foundation for which your vendors actually abide by your plan. So if you don't want them to carry certain things, you need to specify in that rule book, you cannot carry certain things. For us, one of our main rules was that you could not carry anything mass produced, and you could not be an MLM. Now, an MLM is a multi-level marketing business. They're basically selling someone else's products as their own business, and oftentimes there's so many out there, but oftentimes people frown upon MLMs being at farmers markets, despite the fact that some actually do look very farmers market appropriate. So just keep that in mind, that there are certain rules that you want to make, because obviously if you don't set any rules, there's no recourse for action. If someone sets up, if you say, hey, you can set up at my market and you can sell something, and then they start selling something that you don't like, that gets really weird and awkward. This rule book actually will kind of level the playing field so there's no drama, because you don't want any drama in a farmer's market. Because the one thing you'll learn is once you get the market set up, or if you've ever been to a farmer's market, it's like family. All these vendors get to know each other. They know each other by name, they know what they sell, they look out for each other, and they also look out for you. And so you don't want any drama going on at your market. Our market was completely drama-free, and I do hold most of that, obviously, I hold most of that to credit for the rule book that we created. Also, the rule book has what time they can set up and what time they have to leave by. So our market went all day. It was an all-day market. So basically, it was, you can be set up by 8 o'clock, but we ask that you don't set up any earlier than 7:30. The reason being is there were some houses around that surrounded our property, and I didn't want any noise that could potentially bring bad light to our market. So I had that put in the rule book. I also had basically that they had to be gone by dusk. And that's because, as we'll get into, with the city, when we started talking to the city, the one thing that they asked was, do you have any emergency lighting? Basically big floodlights that could illuminate the property to reduce accidents and potential theft and liabilities. And so because we did not have any floodlights, we used the sun's natural light as our floodlight. And so that was part of our market plan that we put in, is it's dawn to dusk. And that way really reduced our need for additional inputs. And also that way, if you're leasing the land and you're just using some vacant field space or something like that, you don't need to have any additional monetary inputs to build infrastructure for the market. It's just there. It's a blank land. And plus, most markets we actually find end by around 5 p.m. at the very latest. Most don't go much later. So just keep that in mind as well. But we did put the setup time and teardown time in place. Now, if it is a 2-day market, which we will be doing a 2-day market next year, if it's a 2-day market, you also have to decide, do you want your vendors to tear down every single day and reset up, or are you going to allow them to stay overnight? If you do allow them to stay overnight, you will have to have a clause in there that any damages or theft you are not held liable, and they need to sign for that. There is actually going to be a portion of this where they're going to have to agree. At the end of the rule book, it is recommended that you get their signature so that so they can't come back at you and say, well, I didn't know about this. You didn't ever mention this. They sign that they agreed and read to all the rules in the rule book. That is very, very important, and that's going to save your behind. So just keep that in mind. The other thing that you're going to want with a market plan is you're going to want to actually provide porta potties. This is another thing that we did as an overall service, because the city will actually require you to have some type of, because you're inviting the public onto your property, it's an event, you have to have sanitation. So you have to have a way for them to wash their hands as well as go to the bathroom. And so we got porta potties on site. We contracted out with a porta potty, a septic company that dropped off porta potties. And so that was an extra weekly cost. You only typically need one. For our market, we only needed one, which was plenty fine, especially when it's changed weekly. They just have you on a weekly route and they clean it every single week. They leave it on the property, and basically once a week they would come by, clean it out, and it was fresh for the next day's market. So that worked out awesome, and it worked out well because, again, it was part of our market plan. That's something that we needed, so we accounted for it. And the overall cost per month was $100 a month. So you break that over the course of 4 weeks in a month, you're looking at roughly about $25 a week is allocated towards the porta potty. So you have about $25 to $50 in insurance, and you have about $25 in porta potty costs. So $50 or so out of your total amount that you bring in is going to be a business expense. So that basically just, kind of cuts into your profit a little bit, but the more vendors you have, the less it cuts into your profit. So you are encouraged to have more vendors, because the more you have, the less it's going to cost you. Now, I will say, if you are in a location where there are public restrooms, this is even better. If you're borrowing land, if the spot you found had public restrooms, or if you can come to an agreement with a nearby business, they love that. Places actually will be totally okay with you asking, as long as you ask first, hey, I'm gonna have my event maybe in your parking lot or nearby your parking lot. Can I send patrons over there to use your restrooms? More often than not, they will love it, because it's actually found that 3 out of every 5 people will actually patronize the business that they're using the restroom of. So if you've ever gone to a fast food place to go to the bathroom on a road trip, how often do you buy a French fry or a coffee or a smoothie or something from that business? I know I have, and you might not, and that's fine. But 3 out of every 5, so basically 80% of patrons will actually patronize the business that they're using the bathroom for. So it's a total win-win, and it eliminates your need for a porta potty. So just, again, picking the right location can reduce some of your costs. The fourth thing that you're going to have to do in order to get the market set up and ready to go is you're going to have to speak with your fire marshal. Now, your town's local EMS or fire or just emergency personnel is going to have to actually either walk the property or just give you outright approval that you can have the event on that site. Now, the one thing we had to do is we had to speak with the fire marshal, because of the fact that it was a basically a field. It was vacant land that we were using, and it was not a actual paved parking lot. It was gravel. There's potential for mud. And they had to actually drive their fire truck onto the parking lot to ensure that they wouldn't get stuck. Because in the event that they had to come on to put out a fire, they don't want to get stuck in the mud. So they actually had to come out and drive out there. They found that it was fine, and they gave us the approval. Or better yet, if there's a fire hydrant, that is great, because that way they don't actually have to drive onto the property. They can just run from the fire hydrant out to where they need. So having close access to the road is awesome. Ours didn't have any fire hydrants, so we had to go the route of making sure that they could drive onto the property. So just keep those things in mind, but they just need to give you the approval that this is all good. Now, the final person you may want to speak to is going to be the city. Now, the city is going to ultimately make you come before the planning commission or the city council or the township council, wherever you are applying for. But going to the city and just letting them know, hey, I'm planning on doing this. Is there any other things that you recommend? This is so important. It actually builds good rapport with the township or city so that you're not just throwing this on them last second. This is something that you may want to come to them and say, I'm planning on doing this. Is there any other things you want us to get in line? Tell them the work that you've already done, and then ask them if there's any other questions that they have. Generally, they will tell you what they require for a certain type of event. Most of them kind of expect certain base level requirements to be met, and then they might have additional requirements or additional questions based on the location or just the size of it, the scope of it. If it's very small and it's in a good location, generally they'll be pretty lax about it. But in our case, if it's like 35 vendors, potentially 600 people patronizing it per day, it's a big event. They want to make sure that it's going to be safe for everyone so that it does not reflect badly on them. And so they did have some additional questions for us, which we'll get into. But just asking them first is huge. Now, once you have done all of that, the final thing that you have to do is apply for an event permit. Now, an event permit is put on through the city or the township. You can actually go, I went and filled out my event permit. The special event permit basically gives you the right to have an event. It's no different than a concert or a party or a parade, whatever it is. You need to fill out a special event permit. That is going to basically outline all of the things that you have done in your plan. That is going to go through health and sanitation facilities. Ours was that porta potties will be picked up and dropped off on a weekly basis or remain on site and refreshed per the recommendation of the supplier. We also have vehicle access and parking. They're going to want to know this. And basically, I had a map overlay. I no longer have that. I cannot find it, but I sent it to them in an email with a map overlay of the proposed parking areas so that they could know where people were parking. I also told them where the vendors were going to be positioned so that they could have an overall flow of the traffic. I had trash collection and cleanup. All trash collection will be done through event sponsors. So if we had food trucks, they would be in charge of their own trash. Trash receptacles will be provided and emptied as needed by us. Basically, trash is expected to be minimal given the scope and size of the project, but food trucks are to provide their own trash receptacle for removal. This will further aid waste management. That was part of our plan. The illumination plan, so they make you illuminate. Hours of the event will take place from dawn to dusk, so natural sunlight will be the illumination source. This is, again, our market plan. You can copy this if you want as a good start, but again, going off of your city and township's requirements is going to be the best bet. Police and fire protection. In the event of a fire, attendees will be asked to leave out the range road access, which will remain unblocked at all times. Calls to St. Clair fire and police departments will be made. This is the township or the county that we are located in, and that's the road that is adjacent to the market. So you want to have, basically, if you're having a fire drill, do you exit out the back or the front, the sides? Where do you exit? What do you tell people? Because if there is a fire, it can be very chaotic, and you want to be able to instruct people where to go. So making sure that there are such things called fire lanes are very important. A fire lane is basically an unblocked area at all times that is kept unblocked, so in the event of a fire, they can get out, or a fire truck can get in. Fires will be very unlikely due to the nature of the venue, and food trucks are required to have fire suppression by law. It is so important that anyone using a grill or a food truck or anything that could be potentially flammable is required to carry a fire extinguisher. This again will not only put any concerns at rest of the city, but it'll also reduce your overall liability, because when you apply for your farmer's market insurance policy, they will ask you about fire suppression. So having that in your plan is so important. And then the final thing that we had was noise control and abatement. This is obviously to reduce noise pollution. I said the hours of operation will occur within acceptable hours of day for noise. The property is large enough to have distance from residents and is located in a road with motor traffic and noise already. So you're giving them basically a reason to say any additional noise will be minimal because they're already located on a very busy road. However, we'll do our very best to reduce any potential extra noise. The amount of attendees and the nature of the event doesn't warrant loud noises either. So again, we're not hosting a concert because this is a special event permit. They don't know what you're doing until you actually go before them and say, this is what I'm doing. So make sure that you just basically state that you're not planning on having any loud bands, loud concerts, and having it take place between dawn to dusk is super critical, because that way if someone is going to bed earlier, you're well below your noise curfew hours. Noise curfew hours are basically the hours of the day or hours of the night when you have to be quiet so that you don't disturb people potentially sleeping. Usually that's around 10 o'clock. So hopefully you guys got a lot out of that. I've done some preliminary research and found that most cities and townships and other municipalities follow the same rules and regulations. They all pretty much follow the same format with slight nuance. So just keep that in mind. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something new. If you did and you have any questions, I'm sure you have lots of questions, make sure to post them down in the comments box below. The next episode is going to be the action phase. We're going to talk all about advertising, marketing, getting your market actually set up, going out and actually flagging the property, marking the vendor spaces, getting your market ready to open for the very first day. So that is super, super important. And I hope you guys won't miss that one. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. We will be back out on the property for the next episode somewhat, because that is going to have, we're going to show you how to flag the property to actually mark out the spaces and coordinate parking and get everything neat and orderly so it's not chaos. And so I hope you guys are going to enjoy that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. As always, if you did enjoy, make sure to throw a like up there. Subscribe if you're not yet already. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home. We'll catch you all later. See ya. Bye.